welcome to Conversations with Dr. Steven Greer. I'm Dr. Greer and the director of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI.org, and the Disclosure Project, which is disclosureproject.org. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for allowing us to have this hour with you every 2 weeks to discuss an update on the projects and the sort of experiences we're having making contact with interstellar civilizations and in higher states of consciousness. And I'm really excited to have with us today a member of our contact team who lives in New York, and it is Marilyn Gewacke, and she is a clinical psychologist and works with the trauma and psychospiritual approaches to healing and wellness. And she's been a member of our contact team in that area for a couple of years now, since first coming on an expedition with us, I believe, at the Outer Banks. Is that right, Marilyn?
Correct.
So thank you very much for being here and being willing to share your experiences. And I think that what would be really great is for people who are listening for the first time, if you don't really have a background in what CSETI does in terms of our contact protocols, you may want to look at those at CSETI.org. There's also an app now, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, where you can download the protocols from the Apple iPhone store, iTunes store, and learn those. But we basically have, as all people in the World Puja Network understand, we've developed a protocol for using the non-local expanded state of awareness to remote view the presence of extraterrestrial civilizations, make contact with them, and also document these contacts, which have been increasing exponentially over the last couple of years, over the last 2 or 3 years in particular. And I think that understanding how we do this and why we're doing it has to do with understanding the fundamental reality of consciousness, and that is that the mind, whereby everyone is awake, is actually a singularity. And by using meditation techniques and approaches, you can settle into a quiet state of consciousness that plugs you into this universal communicator, as I call it, this sort of unbounded, infinitely connecting quantum hologram that is the mind within. And that silent mind within allows us to then not only see the extraterrestrial vehicles and civilizations and people and beings, but then also we have a protocol where we utilize a streaming of consciousness. I call it coherent thought sequencing, where we make contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations because their electronics and their communication systems actually interface with pure thought. It's very similar if you think of a laser. And a laser beam has coherent light. So if it's a green laser, every wavelength, and it's a green spectrum, they're all synced up coherently as opposed to scattered like normal white light. And what that means is that if we're doing this in consciousness, once the mind is expanded into this universal ocean or pool of pure mind, and you begin to then see or sense an extraterrestrial person or planet or spacecraft, you can then connect to them and as an ambassador from Earth to their people in the framework of universal peace, invite them here. And that's what we do, and we actually show them visually where we are. So we will show them, let's say if you're in New York, you will show them the Earth and then North America and zoom into New York and exactly where you are in some meadow, someplace, wherever it is you may be. And you just do this in a streaming of coherent thought. And you do this also with a group of people, and this is the contact team concept that we've developed. And what's interesting is that the reason the technology works and that the protocols work is because any interstellar civilization that's going from one star system to another have mastered the science of consciousness. And the science of consciousness is the great science that's emerging for the next 1,000 years of human existence, or thousands of years. And these extraterrestrial civilizations understand that, but also have very precise instruments, I mean literally electronic devices, that interface as easily with coherent thought as we would switch on a cell phone or turn on a TV set and get a radio and get a signal that's electromagnetic, because they have understood the transdimensional nature of the universe, that it's a conscious universe, and also that their technologies are refined enough to interface so that if they want to turn on a device, they can look at it and think to it, and it turns it on. Yeah. And so this is something which it sounds very science fiction, except it's been observed and documented by people in the aerospace industry that I've worked with for at least 60 years, and is known to be an actual science. And so what we've done is to take the concepts of the ancient Vedic teachings of consciousness, and we actually do pujas on these expeditions and teach people a type of mantra meditation and expansion of awareness, and then we use this coherent thought sequencing to make contact with the ETs and show them where we're located. So that's just sort of a quick, 5-minute or so overview. And this program is called the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, and that stands for we say CE5 for short, an initiative that's an ambassador program so that we train people to make contact for peaceful purposes. And we do not discriminate against any civilization out there. It's our conclusion that they are all highly evolved civilizations and that we're ambassadors of universal peace from Earth to them, and that the reason we're having these amazing contact experiences as a team all over the world, thousands of people now are doing this, is because the extraterrestrial civilizations want to have peaceful contact with humans, and our State Department isn't doing it, and the UN isn't doing it, so we the people are doing it. And that's really one of the central programs of CSETI. And if you want to come on one of these expeditions, there's more information about them at CSETI.org. So with that brief overview, I just want to, again, welcome Marilyn to the show. And if you can, why don't you share a little bit about what happened as you began to get involved with this, Marilyn, the sort of amazing experience you had at the dentist office and just some amazing things.
Well, I was reading Dr. Greer's book, and I was sitting in the dentist's office, and my mouth was getting numb from Novocaine, and I was reading the part in the book about the CE5 protocol. And right in the middle of my reading, I hear this beautiful music coming over the loudspeaker system in the dentist's office, and it sounded like space music, but it was just beautiful. And the technician came in and said, "Oh my gosh, that music is beautiful." And I said, "Oh, you guys have such great music." And she goes, "That's not our music." Then the head dentist came all the way from the front of the office and was kind of yelling through the office, "Who has this music? It sounds like a spaceship is about ready to land." I kid you not, the head dentist said this. And so finally the technician said, "Even though it's on the speakers, could you look at your cell phone?" And I opened my purse and I looked at my cell phone, and sure enough, the music was coming from my cell phone, somehow being projected on the speaker system. And I opened my cell phone, and there was a picture of a silver sphere with hieroglyphics going down the sphere. I didn't recognize what they were, but they were hieroglyphics, and the music went on for about 5 minutes, and then it stopped, the picture left, and to say the least, I was kind of shaken, and I said to the technician, I have to tell you this, I'm reading Dr. Greer's book on CE5 contact. And I left the dentist's office, and maybe 1 week later, it happened again. And this time I was with my partner in the office, and luckily we both saw it, and thank goodness I had a witness, and there it was again. Again, it went on for 5 minutes. There was a picture of this wonderful, beautiful sphere with hieroglyphics and this just outrageously beautiful music. So I went to Verizon, and I said, "Can people send you ringtones or pictures like this?" And he said, "Not on your phone." He said, it's technologically impossible. But he kind of thought I was a little kooky, and then it happened 2 more times.
Oh my God.
At this point, I went to another Verizon technician, and this guy was pretty interested. So he said, "You know what, we have a way of looking up," and I kept, Stephen, the dates and the times. And so I gave him the dates and the times that this music had come in. He looked up my record. He said, there is nothing on record, and it is technologically impossible for what you're describing.
Correct.
And luckily I had witnesses, and at that point, after the fourth time, that's when I said, I'm going to Dr. Greer's expedition in the Outer Banks in, I believe it was May of 2009.
Right.
And after that, my phone never did it again.
Yeah, they were calling you literally and physically and metaphorically. And that is an amazing story. And there's so many people who've had stories like this where once they begin to lock into the consciousness of this and the ETs want them to be involved, the most bizarre and technologically, by human standards, impossible things happen with electronics. I mean, everyday electronics or lights or what have you. And it's really, but it makes sense once you understand the transdimensional nature of extraterrestrial civilizations, where they can be present in the room with you, not visible with the naked eye, not fully materialized, but can be doing things in your phone or through a series of electronic tones or an orb or some other sort of phenomenon. And once you understand that, they can be folded within space-time in another dimension, but interfacing with this dimension, this three-dimensional space-time with our electronics, then it begins to make total sense. And that's one of the things that we teach people, how to make that kind of contact and how to continue it in ways that really no government can interfere with, and no government can stop, because it's way beyond their pay grade. I hate to say it, but so this is what's really beautiful. And the people like Marilyn and also your partner and other people who have had this, and there are really many, many people who've had versions, not exactly what Marilyn just described to all of you, but aspects of that. Once they read, and I don't know which book you were reading, if you were reading Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. Or,
yes, that was it. Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge.
Yeah, there's a book that I wrote a couple years ago called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is sort of autobiographical, but it describes all these experiences that I've had, and it starts out with my childhood and the contact that happened, and it's a pretty quick read. You can get it at disclosureproject.org, and now I think it's in 7 languages now. But what's interesting is that once someone gets it, but it'll happen in these ways where even mass witnessed events like that will happen, like in your dentist's office, where the dentist is going, it sounds like a ship landing, which it was.
Yes.
So that is a really amazing. When I first heard that story, I thought, well, you guys are supposed to be involved in doing this, no question, that they were calling you literally and metaphorically.
Well, and Stephen, I knew this when we decided to come to your expedition. The phone calls ended. That was it. You're meant to go. You get it. Now you got it. Okay. Right, exactly. And then at the Outer Banks, we had amazing contact events happened that where craft were filmed, and where they were fully materialized in the sky around us, and what have you. And this is the sort of thing that when people come on these expeditions, I mean, everyone's sort of going, well, or do you have a sighting of or something like this happen once a decade? No, it's every day and every night. It becomes like this amazing sort of flow of events that takes place, but it taking place interdimensionally and multidimensionally, and it happens in consciousness. People will go back to their hotel rooms, and I remember about a year and a half ago in Florida, we were out, and this man who couldn't come out one night, he wasn't feeling well, and it was kind of cold and windy, and I think this was in 2010, it was at Marco Island, and he went into his hotel room, and he says, well, if you're here with me, do something that's just unmistakable. So there was like this brilliant blue sphere, like what you're describing, except yours was metallic, I think, on your cell phone, but this was actually three-dimensional, floated in the room, went over to his microwave, went ding, 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 like you do when you're turning the microwave on, turned the microwave on, and then he could not turn the microwave off because it was wanting to show that, yes, we are absolutely here, and he had to unplug it. He had to pull the cord out of the wall to get it to stop. Well, I remember in England last summer, not this summer, but I had my backpack with my radar detector off. We were in a crop circle, Stephen, and I don't know if you remember this, but we were in a crop circle, and you were in the middle of the circle. And my knapsack was quite a bit away, and all of a sudden my radar detector not only turned on, but started with the Brittany beeps, which were beeps that came out of the radar detector that the radar detector doesn't have in it.
Correct.
Those particular beeps. And they went on for, I think, like 2 minutes in the crop circle. Oh, yeah,
at least 2 minutes. I think longer than that, more like 5 to 10. In fact, they went on until I found the detector in your pack. We took it out, and I looked at it and then put some buttons. But it was, and the tone was dun, 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 dun.
Yes,
dun,
that was.
Dun, 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 dun. Now, when we were in Brittany in France, previous to that, we had another detector that was there. It wasn't Marilyn's, but it did the same cadence. It did the same tones, but it did it for 2 hours and 9 minutes or something unbelievable.
Oh my God.
And when it was doing this in Brittany, it was doing it while there were all these other bizarre phenomena. And this is where we had a ship that quasi-materialized in the field. And I didn't realize that we were going through some old photographs, and we found this beautiful purple disc hovering, huge, about 10 feet above the ground, over by the puja table, because I was getting ready to do a puja where we honor the ancient enlightened masters, and then we do a meditation and go into cosmic consciousness together as a group. And we had like 60 people there. And we were just about to do that, and everyone on the side of the circle where I was sitting, and it was still very light because we were in Brittany in July, and it stays light till 11 o'clock at night. We were there, and suddenly there was this multicolored purplish sphere that was, I don't know, maybe 30 feet across, that was about 10 feet outside the circle, on the other side of the circle, that just blipped in and blipped out, materialized and dematerialized. And everyone on our side saw it, and they went, oh, my God, what was that? I said, well, they're here. And they're here to do the puja and the meditation with us. And these are the interstellar, highly enlightened beings that have been guardians of higher consciousness on Earth for literally millions of years. And I'm not exaggerating, millions of years. And Emery, a guy on our team who takes photography, snapped the photograph, and you can see me pointing with my finger. And at the end of my finger, exactly where I'm pointing, is this beautiful royal purple disc that's there in the photograph, hovering about 10 feet, 5 to 10 feet above the field near the puja table. Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is. And this is the sort of, so, people, we're going to come out, I hope, soon with a new book and DVD that have all these new images and experiences on them, because, I can't believe it's been 2 years since we released a Contact Countdown to Transformation, which has a DVD with it that has a lot of the images and pictures. But in the last 2 years,
so much has happened.
We have had so much contact with both tones and video and lights and contact and actual extraterrestrial beings that we've been able to photograph, physical beings that we didn't have 2 years ago, that it actually eclipses everything from the previous 19 or 18 years. That it's just amazing what's happening. So anyway, when people come on these expeditions, they have sort of shocked at what it really involves, because it's a whole week in higher consciousness training, remote view training, but also then going out under the stars till 1 o'clock or so in the morning and making contact and having all these sort of things unfold around us. And the reason I believe it's happening with such increasing levels of contact is because the ETs urgently want it to happen. And they know that the time for transformation on this planet, where we start an entirely new civilization, an age of enlightenment, of world peace, but not just world peace, interplanetary universal peace, and bringing forth these new sciences and technologies and free energy and anti-gravity and a whole reordering of our macroeconomic system and the development of an enlightened civilization, that this is the time is very urgent that this happen, and they're increasingly making this kind of contact. So, and it happens in all these sort of extraordinary ways. And some people have asked, well, why do you have like these magnetometers, which are actually this iPhone app I was talking about actually turns your iPhone into a magnetometer so that when a craft is approaching, it will signal audibly, and also a needle will tilt, showing the magnetic field changing as a extraterrestrial vehicle approaches. And the tones that we send out into space, there are some beeping tones that were recorded in a crop circle from ET craft that was there. That is sent out into space, and that actually can be played from the iPhone or from the iPad. So this is a really cool app, and for people who can't come on these week-long expeditions. But and even if you do, it's nice to have on your phone if you have an iPhone or an iPad. And so what happens is that we find that when we have these magnetometers, we have professional grade ones, and also these radar detectors. It's like when if you're going down the highway and you have one of these things that pick up the police radar. Those will be out in the middle of very remote places. And in the case where Marilyn was talking about, we were in this field, far away from anything that would cause it to go off, and it just spontaneously starts going off in this dun 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 dun, like that, over and over and over. It's
and
just
Steven, that same, my radar detector, the day we were leaving the site in England, again, my radar detector was off. It was in my backpack. It was in the corner of the room. I was packing my suitcase. It was 7 a.m, and doesn't it start with Britney Beats again?
Oh, my God.
Da, da, da. And it went on for 15 minutes in my room, going off, and again, no one was by the backpack. No one tripped it up, and the radar detector was off. So there it was again saying goodbye because we were leaving. So things happen a lot during these expeditions.
It does. It happens every day. In fact, several times a day. And what you find is that these electronics will do things that they cannot do. They're not even programmed. They don't even have the physical capability to do, like your cell phone, getting this sphere with the ET writing on it, on the sphere, which it couldn't do that, and yet it did. And so obviously what we're having are transdimensional electronics from extraterrestrial civilizations once we open this sort of vector of contact, this opening to contact that happens.
Well, one of the most amazing things I want to say to encourage anybody to go on these expeditions, it's for CE5 contact, but I think what's happened to me and many people who have gone is by understanding this expanded consciousness, this is how we're changing as a human race, and really it's about meeting the ETs in this higher state, not having the ETs come down. And as you say many times, people want to come and kick the tires of the craft. It's not about that. It's about human consciousness raising up in this transformational time. And the goal, or one of the things, is to make this ET contact. And when we become a cohesive consciousness group, either in these expeditions or even coming back home, and many people have formed local CSETI groups, that cohesive consciousness is how we have to walk around in the world together. And once that's open, it's like opening lines, or it's like a radio tower that is so expanded beyond your local area. It's expanded not only in the world, but it's expanded out into the galaxy, and that's why we can make contact, and that's why people can go home when they follow your protocols and continue to make contact.
Absolutely.
Which we have done.
Yeah, why don't you share some of the other things that have happened? It's so exciting. You're part of this team in New York, and then you've had other experiences in other places with CSETI.
Well, we have this local CSETI group, and we have gotten quite cohesive together. And one of the most exciting nights, we were out at our house in the country and in the middle of nowhere, and we were doing a very intense one-of-your meditations, and one of the members opened their eyes and saw this incredible craft. It was probably only 1,500 feet above, and it came across the sky, and it was probably there 20 to 30 seconds, and which is a long time, and it had a golden craft in the front with a green-blue tail streaking out the back, and it went across the sky enormously close and enormously slow. And that was right after we had just come to an end of a very beautiful meditation. And our group can be, if it's rainy weather, we can meet inside, and we've had balls of light come through when we're sitting inside meditating, coming through one window and leaving out another, and then right afterwards, enormous lightning in the middle of winter. And in New York, you don't have lightning in the winter typically, but the sky was filled with lightning after that. And so even indoors, we've had amazing kind of experiences. But recently, I was at a family cabin in Minnesota, and a couple of the CSETI members from this local area were traveling through to go to Washington. And so they stopped by, and we had a CSETI night in the wilds of Minnesota. And we had amazing contact. Again, a craft came very, very close that looked very similar to the one that I just described. Then we saw another craft that split into two and then split into three more craft. And so we had an amazing night, and we kept, every night after even they left, we kept seeing lots of craft. Well, wouldn't you know, in the local newspapers, in the next few days, there were all kinds of reports that people called the police department and the newspaper saying that they had UFO sightings.
Yes, this happens a lot when CSETI teams go to an area, and it ends up getting even back in the early days when we were down in Florida and near Pensacola, and we had people out on a beach. I was teaching them these protocols, and we had 4 ET craft appear floating towards us against a very stiff wind that was coming off the Gulf. And we have photographs and videotape of that are in this DVD that's out with this book, Contact Countdown to Transformation. And again, all of that is at disclosureproject.org. There's a place where you can order those if you're interested. Well, what happened was that ended up being reported not only to the police, but the local newspaper had a photograph of this craft on the front page of the paper the next morning. So this does happen. And there's another event that many people have heard of called the Phoenix Lights, which is when these massive objects were seen over Phoenix back about 1997. And that was a CE5. A lot of people don't know that. I was there with Sherry Adamak. We were making contact, but also putting together the best images to give to members of Congress that we were briefing, and in April. And these were the closed briefings we did for Congress before Disclosure Project occurred in 2001. And we were, there were going to be, and there were members of the House and Senate there, and also there were chair people of committees there, as well as representatives from the White House and the Department of Defense and other things. So I really wanted to put together the very best video and photo evidence we could find. So we were making this digital master reel of these images, and I did this CE5 contact as I was arriving into Phoenix that night and asked the ETs to do something spectacular and unmistakable that would be documented. And we were literally there, and where we were in Tempe was the digital lab where we were working. It was the epicenter of this event. And, of course, they got to be known as the Phoenix Lights, and eventually it got out in the media that this happened. But that was actually a close encounter of the fifth kind, a CE5 that we had done. And so sometimes it does make its way into the media, and often it doesn't. But the fact is that it doesn't really matter. It's happening every time we go out and do this. And because the ETs are always with us, because they want to have, I tell people it's not that we're so special, it's that the purpose of what we're doing is special. And there aren't a lot of people who can do this free from fear and prejudice and in a higher state of consciousness and without a lot of political and other agendas operating. And what the ETs are looking for are humans to be points of contact on Earth. And if you understand that, and if you understand the philosophy behind being an ambassador to the universe that's peaceful and that uses higher states of consciousness, and then even though the people, when they first hear about these protocols, it sounds very complicated, it really isn't that difficult. I mean, Marilyn, you can talk about your experience with going into these and how you learned them.
Well, I'll tell you, the protocols are magnificent, and it has changed my life coming to these expeditions over the last two years in terms of my own expanded consciousness and my ability to go there and to remote view.
Yes.
And one of the most amazing remote views, I think, was in Marco Island. When was that? This past spring.
Yeah, it was just in March.
Right. And in the morning I had remote viewed that all the civilizations that had ever visited CSETI were going to come that night. And all of a sudden I saw this station where this man in a military uniform of some kind that didn't look familiar at all, but was very friendly, and he said, everything will stand down tonight, and a spectacular event I'm going to let happen because I'm sort of the one that's guarding whether the military stands down or not. And I didn't quite know what this meant, but that night, and you had a meditation that said not just all civilizations that had visited CSETI, but all that had ever visited Earth. And sure enough, that night, you had done a puja, and right afterwards, we saw 3 hours of these most magnificent lights blinking on and off in the banyan trees not far from, just across the bay. And this went on for 3 hours, and I remember standing at one point and feeling touched and even hearing my rain jacket crinkle because it was a windbreaker as I felt touch, and it crinkled exactly where I was touched, and then I felt lifted off the ground just slightly and put back down. And it was the most amazing experience. And sure enough, I mean, that night there was so much, probably the most contact that I had experienced on a CSETI event.
Oh, yes. And
that's...
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and then what was most interesting to follow up, the next morning I had another remote view of the same station, but another guy was on, and he felt absolutely evil and not good, and he communicated that, watch out tonight. And that following night, we had the helicopter come across exactly where we had seen the lights, or nearby us on the beach, strobing this light in a very mysterious way, strobing all across the beach. And our activity that night was very limited. So it was interesting.
Oh, yes. And this is exactly how this unfolds, is that a lot of people are astonished when they hear, of course, there are the National Reconnaissance Office, the top secret spy agency that runs the satellites, and they monitor what we're doing. But there are people friendly to what we're doing that sometimes will, shall we say, stand down those systems, and there will be a lot of activity. This particular night that Marilyn's talking about, and this just happened in March at Marco Island. And by the way, those of you who want to come next year in April, we're going to be there for a week at the same location on the Gulf of Mexico. And the information for that is at CSETI.org, CSETI.org. And I and Marilyn and several people got that night there would be this kind of contact, and I could see that it was being monitored and recorded, but there was like an opening where normally when there's that much close, and you have to understand these were a few hundred feet away, where there were objects that were visible to the naked eye that were materializing in front and on the beach that would appear and then disappear and swirl. And this went on not for a few seconds, for 3.5 hours, and we have videotape of it. Now, this is all material that's will be released in this new release of documentation. What was fascinating about it to me is that towards the end of it, some people came into this station that you had remote viewed, where this man who was more friendly, and took over, and boy, were they angry. And I could feel they were really mad that this happened. And the next night is when we had this very classified helicopter come over loaded with electronic warfare stuff that came right exactly over the area where this transdimensional flotilla, I call it the emergence, where there were literally hundreds, thousands of objects that materialize and dematerialize over 3.5 hours in this very specific area. And that's exactly where that helicopter came zooming through, loaded with some kind of bizarre electronic warfare technology. And we actually filmed that chopper, and there's no question that that's what it was. And this has happened before. I mean, a few years ago, we were at Joshua Tree National Park, and we had a brilliant object appear about 15 feet over our circle at exactly the point where, in the meditation, you know, Marilyn, where I take people into universal consciousness, and we're doing this visualization of the earth and connecting to the higher consciousness of the great being and the ET civilizations to heal the earth and transform the earth. And there was this brilliant object that burst forth out of higher dimensions into 3-dimension, and it was so bright that people who had their eyes closed could see the veins in their eyelids. Within minutes of that, there was a jet that came in from the area of Edwards Air Force Base over the national park, and this is illegal, at 200 or 300 feet. That was huge. It was like the size of a 747, loaded with electronic warfare gear. And I mean, it came in at stall speed. I don't even know how it stayed in the air without crashing. And it was putting lights all over, checking because they were trying. And so what we find is that there's this cat and mouse silliness going on where people who do not want this contact to happen try to suppress it, and yet the ETs keep finding ways to allow it to happen in ways that are mysterious to some but very clear to us. If you understand transdimensional manifestation, faster than the speed of light communication and travel, and once you master that, which is what we teach people to do on these expeditions, they can't do anything about it. It's just going to happen. And that's what's so wonderful, is that what Marilyn was saying, we're reaching this critical mass where it's sort of the morphogenic field that Rupert Sheldrake talks about, where there are so many people now doing this. There's so many thousands of people now who've learned these protocols, and from Malaysia to Russia to South Africa to China to everywhere. What you find is that this is happening in a way that is really beyond the ability of these control freaks who've been keeping this information secret for 60 years to maintain control of it. Now, that makes them very angry at me, but too bad. I mean, I'm used to that. I mean, you know, I'm the guy everyone loves to hate. If you like secrecy, you do not like me. But the point is, I also head up the Disclosure Project and the OrionProject.org, so, you know, there are a lot of reasons for people not to like me. But the point is that, you know... Well,
the main reason, Steve, is because you know the truth.
Yeah, you know, I know the truth, and them not...
And you know how to teach people the truth. And now there are many thousands of people who also know the truth, and the other thing is that extraterrestrials show up in your meditations, and nobody can block that either. They show up, and you can begin to have a relationship in your meditations, as you've taught us to do. And I love it because in England, I remember one night you said, you know, they may show up in your meditation, but when intuitively you feel they're around, take your camera without a flash and take a picture.
Right.
And one morning I had been working with this wonderful ET who was a blue being. And that night, we were sitting in, again, a crop circle in England, and I just felt this wonderful being very close by. I took my camera, took a picture, and sure enough, in the picture, there is a blue being. Right. Unfortunately, I shook the camera when I took it, so it's a little blurry, but there is no question about this blue being showing up in the visual spectrum of the camera.
Absolutely, and that's actually Hal Raven, who's a member of our team in Orange County, when we were at Joshua Tree about a little less than 2 years ago. Less than 2 years ago. It was in November of 2009. And we had this sphere that materialized out in the field with us in this really remote place in Joshua Tree National Park. And we had gone out on a break, and it was the size of maybe a softball. And it was sort of a golden whitish sphere, and it was floating beside me. And several people saw it, and then it vanished. And I said, oh, they're here. And so I said, well, let's invite them back up to the circle where everyone was. We had 30 or 40 people. And now we're limiting this to like 25 people because it was too many people for me to manage, frankly. And so then we came up, and suddenly we heard 3 or 4 extraterrestrial voices. They weren't speaking English, but it was in the desert, just outside of where our circle was, where there were no humans. And I have very advanced military-grade night scopes, the ones you have to fill out the Homeland Security papers to get. And Marilyn's looked through them. They're amazing. You see everything. There's nobody over there, and yet you could hear these just a few seconds or moments of this sort of talking. And I heard 3 or 4. Most people heard females, but I heard one male. Well, Raven goes over, and she just has a fairly inexpensive single-lens reflex camera, 35 millimeter, and she didn't have it on tripod, so she literally she did it so that the lens was open for about 4 seconds, and she knew they were over there because we had all heard them, and so she held her breath, literally held her breath when she took the picture, and in the picture, which is at CSETI.org, there's an orb and a cone of light, and then behind our chairs, which were empty because we were all standing, is this extraterrestrial being whose name is Bijou. And he told us he was from the Andromeda galaxy, which is about 2.5 million light years from here. And it's a man. And he's floating in the air, turns at the waist, and is looking at the camera. You really need a good high-definition screen to see the quality of this, but it's in the photograph, not a Photoshop thing. This is for real. And so, but the way that happened was that we felt they were there, even though they weren't fully materialized in this dimension. Raven asked these ETs if she could take their picture, and this ET obliged, because he clearly turned and was sort of smiling at her, looking straight at the camera. And that's how it happened.
Yes, well, several members of our local group have taken pictures, again, from that intuitive place, and have amazing green orbs and blue orbs, and it's not dust. They're the real thing, and streaks going across the screen that are totally unexplainable. And it's, again, it's in this meditative state when you feel intuitively that you know you're beginning to make contact, and the camera shows it to be true.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing to remember is that because they understand our technology, even if our scientists don't fully understand theirs, they can utilize our technology, whether it's a camera or a video or a radar detector or a magnetic field meter or any other electronic device, to signal to us and to contact us. Now, obviously, you know, we've had craft that's fully materialized in this 3-dimension there, and everyone sees it. But often, depending on whether or not there are military objects, you know, craft doing reconnaissance, or whether there's interference and all this sort of thing, they may do things in ways that are very subtle but mysterious, and but at the same time unmistakable, just like what happened with your cell phone. I mean, this is something that, you know, is amazing that, you know, there was, when you first described this to me, that there was this sphere with this sort of hieroglyphic writing, which is exactly what was described by people who saw the materials from the ET craft that was shot down near Roswell in 1947. By the way, it was shot down. It was not with a missile, but with an electromagnetic Tesla-type coil that was in a radar dome device in the 40s. So what we're finding is that these extraterrestrial civilizations have to be a little bit careful, because there are many times that they have been fired at or pursued. We have actually had jets scrambled into our location after one appears. But they're willing to do this. And what was amazing at Marco Island is that this was allowed to go on for over 3 hours. It was about 3.5 hours, actually. And with the night scope, it was hundreds of them that appeared. But even with the camera that we have a camera that's hooked up to a night scope that a member of our team, Jack, who lives in Ohio, who was there. There's, I think we counted something like 60-some of these objects that are actually filmed very close to our group right there on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, and that was, I think, the same night that you had done a puja over to the side, and you went back during this 3.5 hours to where you had done the puja, and I believe somebody had taken pictures. One picture you were there, the next picture you weren't, the next picture you were there again. And so at some point you became very translucent over by the puja where you had done it during that time.
Yes, and there's a lot of this sort of mysterious people who've studied the Vedas and the Rig Veda, Sam Veda, but also the understood the cities, SIDDHIS, and we teach all this on these expeditions so people understand what is involved with levitation, materialization, dematerialization, seeing the future, remote viewing. These are all things that are part of the science of consciousness that are part of our birthright as human beings. It's not like you have to be a guru that's been in a cave for 30 years. Amazingly, people from all walks of life have come on these expeditions, learn these techniques and protocols, and then they're learning to remote view and make contact, and amazing things are happening. I totally reject this idea that it's something, some elite group of psychics can do this. It's just nonsense. Everyone can do this. And that's, the beauty of it is understanding that every single person has folded within them the totality of all that exists in the universe in this quantum hologram of awareness, of mind. And it's about the human ego and individuality becoming silent and that drop becoming one with the ocean. And when that drop becomes one with the ocean, everything's possible. And that is really not that difficult. And it's something that is so edifying to do anyway for your own spiritual development, but then it has all these practical applications for interstellar contact because these ET civilizations certainly understand the science of consciousness and have electronics that do things that would sound like the ancient masters in India or the Himalayas with these cities, these abilities and powers and different things. And one of them is this and we've had this happen for years where I will be approaching a group of ETs that will be partially materialized or scintillating, just an area that will be out in the field or on the beach. And as I go over there, people will see through me. I mean, I feel like I'm there, but I'm in a very rarefied, higher frequency.
Well, that happened in the Outer Banks in 2009 when the craft flew into the ocean, and then we had those light points come, and you went out, and you had a mist around you, and you slowly looked like you were disappearing, and you had quite an experience. And those points of light, I think there were 3 of them, different colors, were there also for quite a while.
Yeah, that was an hour that we filmed these 3 objects that were actually ET beings that were in this big craft that came up from the ocean, and it was transdimensional. But these were seen with the naked eye, and we filmed them, and they were there for an hour, at the end of which I walked over to them to thank them and welcome them, and I sort of merged into their dimension and partially dematerialized. And it was very emotional for me because it was clear to me that I could have left and gone. But, of course, I have family here, and I have the work I'm supposed to be here. But I actually burst into tears,
Yes, I remember that. That was quite an amazing night. And we had hundreds of flotilla right before that happened in the horizon, in the north and the west. It
was amazing. Literally hundreds of them in space. Yeah, like a guardian flotilla that was protecting this event taking place on the beach. And that videotape is on the DVD that comes with the book that's at disclosureproject.org, and it's called Contact Countdown to Transformation. And so, these are the things that are happening just all the time. And, it's, of course, I've been doing this since I was a teenager, and the book Hidden Truths, Forbidden Knowledge, I describe how when I was, 17, I had this near-death experience, and after that, learned meditation and higher states of consciousness, and then had this contact up on this mountain in North Carolina. And that's really where these protocols came into being is where the ETs and I kind of co-created this technique to use the ability of the human mind to experience cosmic awareness, and in that expanded state of higher consciousness, use this coherent thought technique to contact them and invite them into wherever you are, wherever you happen to be located. And it works. And people are having these things happen, and I'm very gratified to say this, when I'm nowhere around. I tell people years ago that my whole purpose in sharing what I'm doing is so that if I drop dead tomorrow, that everyone could do this, and my existence on this plane is redundant, completely unnecessary. And I think that, and I mean that sincerely, that what I've tried to share with people is that everyone has the ability, both in their consciousness and in the techniques and their toolbox, to do this, and no force on earth can stop it. I mean, no matter how, frankly, evil some of these military-industrial programs are to try to suppress this, they can't. They can't stop it.
No, they can't, and it's a common denominator. It's not the common separator.
Exactly.
It is the common denominator, and we all have it, and that's what your protocol really is an incredible, and it's brilliant, and anybody who gets a chance to go on your expeditions, their life will be changed, because it is traveling in consciousness, and once you learn and understand what this expanded consciousness is about, it also brings you hope of what we're going to be able to do as human beings on this earth, as well as with our ET brothers and sisters, and that's pretty marvelous.
Right, and that's really why they're here, because they know we're at this critical point where humanity is kind of going from rambunctious and rather destructive late adolescence into something resembling maturity, the hallmark of which is a peaceful civilization. We're not quite there yet, but they know that we have the potential to get there, and they're very much eager to have points of contact, and they need those points of contact, because contrary to the science fiction fantasies, they're just simply not going to land and force us to become civilized, and we have to do that, we the children of Earth, but with some help from our friends. And this is one of the real messages I've gotten, is that we have the ability to do it, but we're never alone and can be assisted on multiple dimensions, not just extraterrestrial, but also the angelic realm and the realms of those who have passed into the worlds of light before us, like Sherry Adamak, who worked with me so many years. She's been very involved in assisting with some of these contact events, even though she's in her body of light in the astral worlds of light. And what you realize is that it's an unbroken string of life and consciousness that strings to infinity, and that we're all part of it. There's no separation except the barriers that we intellectually construct. And so we can deconstruct them, and we can transcend them and experience this oneness of consciousness in life, and in that make contact with these dimensions and these civilizations that are here. And they're here to help, and they're here to understand, and they're here to assist, but they know that the real work that has to happen from humans who are enlightened enough to understand this. And I always tell people, you don't have to be perfect to do this, because if you waited to be perfect, you'd never do anything, because we're human, and this is Earth. This is not Harania Loka or some astral heaven. So we have to accept the fact that we have our limitations and our condition, the human condition being what it is, and yet there is this perfection folded within all of us that one can experience and begin to allow to move through us, in spite of ourselves sometimes, perhaps. But and that's certainly a very humble and I think correct way to view it. And in that is where the grace is, and where the magic is, and how these contact events take place, is being in that state of awareness and allowing it to take place in spite of. And most people get so hung up on what they can't do, they don't let what can happen manifest in their life, and that's what this is really about.
And it is being human. It is being in that human state, creating what you're talking about. That's the point. We're not supposed to be above ourselves. We're supposed to be in this human experience, creating this incredible ability to expand this consciousness, not only to connect with ETs, but also to create this incredible peace on Earth that we're capable of. And that's in our human forms.
Right, and that's what we have to do, and in that also to bring forward the sciences that have been withheld from the planet. I mean, I remind people that we're about 100 years into a period where we could have had world peace and also advanced technologies, free energy, the elimination of poverty, the elimination of environmental destruction. This is not a utopian fantasy. This is actually physically here already. There are folks who do not want that to happen simply because they enjoy the power of the centralized system. But that doesn't mean that we have to be slaves on their plantation, except that we get brainwashed that we have to be slaves on their plantation. We can say, no, we're going to be free. I'll never forget when the head of Army Intelligence threatened me back in 1992 and said, who the hell do you think you are doing this? And I said, well, I'm a free denizen of the universe, and this is what I know to be true. And I proceeded to explain the power of this state of consciousness and the experiences, and he just looked and said, well, there's a whole group of CIA and National Security Agency, NSA people, and he said, well, we know exactly who this son of a bitch is. And I said, well, yeah, so... Anyway, some of these stories are in Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. They're kind of hilarious because of my interactions with these kind of characters. But, you just go forward and you just say, well, look, here's what the truth is. You're not going to be daunted by the kind of nonsense. And the ETs know that we are in a stage where this potential within us has to be brought to the fore and quickly. And I think this is why the level of contact, and I have to say also the caliber of people, very conscious, intelligent people like Marilyn had these extraordinary things happen and have been pulled into this effort and invited in, and insistently. I mean, I remember when you first told me this story with your phone and these tones and this sphere and all this, that it was almost like an insistence.
Yes, it felt like that.
Well, it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I told you, I said, yeah, they were wanting you to say, yeah, do it. So people need to realize that these extraterrestrial civilizations, of which there are many, are working together, and yet they're very much want to have points of contact here for this transformation to take place, because it's not, it's like when Larry King asked me, why don't they land on the White House lawn? I said, well, who's the White House? The one in Colombia, South America, or the one in Russia, or the Kremlin? Or they're looking for people, pure-hearted, intelligent, conscious people who understand this, who will do it without the usual Manichaean worldview of us versus them and good and bad and good ETs and bad ETs and this whole fantasy that you hear about out there. That's just really a brainwash. And say, okay, we're going to move into a time not just of world peace, but of universal peace. And we're going to have contact with all these civilizations, and we're going to live together peacefully, not only in Earth, but also in space. And that's the consciousness, that's the thrust behind what we're doing. And once you accept that and move in that direction, there's no limit in the ways that these extraterrestrial civilizations will contact you directly and indirectly, and also in these strange transdimensional ways, even with your phone. So now we're using that as an example. It could happen in any.
Well, and it can happen. I'll tell you, I have to say one last thing. Last week in a dream, all I was told in the dream was, look at Orion. And I saw the wonderful Orion in my dreams, and I woke up, and that morning at 6 a.m. when it was still dark, and I kind of forgotten about the dream, and I was walking my dog, and I looked up, and I saw Orion, and I thought, oh, yes, I just dreamt to look at Orion. And right then, Stephen, a beautiful craft moved across the sky. I yelled to Diane, please come and look at this beautiful craft. It was in the sky for probably 30 seconds, moving very, very slowly right across Orion's belt.
Oh, my God. That's so awesome. And interesting, last night, my wife and I were walking out here on our farm, and we were talking about this expedition that's coming up in Southern California this week. And as I was talking about it, we had a craft fly right over our heads underneath the clouds that was this brilliant blue-white, almost fluorescent white, brilliant ship. And so these sort of things happen. It's not like it's rare. It happens all the time. And it's beautiful once you get into the state of consciousness of understanding it and knowing what to do. So, well, Marilyn, we're out of time. I can't believe it's been an hour already. But we need to wrap this up. I do want to thank you for sharing your awesome experiences and being part of our work.
Well, it's been my pleasure and my honor, Steve.
Well, and thank you for being on this edition of Conversations with Dr. Steven Greer, and look forward to seeing all of you soon out under the stars. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks here. So until next time, keep looking up, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.